Today, I want to share with you a story that touched me deeply. It's about a young woman named Hannah Lee who had never known love, and a tall, broad-shouldered Apache man named Jace Tahoma, whose past was marked by both loyalty and loss. In the spring of 1885, in the rugged Arizona territory, their paths crossed by chance. What began as a simple trade of work for a meal slowly grew into something neither of them expected, a bond built one quiet day at a time, through storms, seasons, and the unspoken understanding between two hearts that had never truly found a home. If this story speaks to your heart, leave me a comment below. Now let's begin. The wind carried the scent of mesquite and warm earth, pushing thin clouds across a pale spring sky. Hannah Lee leaned against the weathered corral post, hammer in hand, her gloves dark with dust. She was mending the east fence, where a stubborn mule had splintered two rails the week before. Sweat trickled along her temple, even in the morning cool. In Arizona, the sun didn't waste time. She was halfway through setting the new plank when she noticed the dust. It rose from the far stretch of her property, a thin plume curling against the horizon, moving steady. She straightened, shaded her eyes with one hand. A rider. Ah! Hannah's gut tightened. Few came this way without reason, and most of those reasons weren't good. She set the hammer down, reached for the Winchester propped against the corral, and waited. The rider drew nearer, the dust plume following like a long tail. She could make out the dun-colored horse first, its flanks lean from miles. Then the man, a broad silhouette against the light, slowing his approach until he was a good 30 feet from her gate. He stopped there, sitting tall in the saddle, and lifted one hand palm out in a gesture of peace. The man was built like a wall, broad shoulders under a sleeveless buckskin vest, muscled arms bare to the sun, skin bronze from more than just a season outdoors. His black hair, long and thick, was braided over one shoulder, a single raven feather tied near the end. He wore no hat, letting the sun hit the hard lines of his face, high cheekbones, a square jaw, a mouth set calm but not unfriendly. "Good morning," he said, his voice deep and carrying. There was the faintest cadence of another language beneath the English. Hannah kept the rifle angled across her body. "You're on private land." "I know," he replied evenly. "Name is Jace Tahoma. I saw smoke from your chimney. Figured I'd see if there was trouble." She studied him, eyes flicking from his face to his horse, to the long knife at his belt. Apache, she thought. Not just by looks, by the way he sat the saddle like it was part of him. "No trouble here," she said, "and I'm not expecting company." "Not looking for trouble," he said. "Lost a shoe on my mare 2 days back. Fixed it best I could, but I've been on the trail without a warm meal since. Thought maybe I could trade some work for something hot." But the last thing she needed was another mouth to feed, but the man's eyes dark, steady, held no shiftiness, none of the twitch she'd learned to spot in drifters. His horse, too, was in fair shape despite the road, ribs showing, but coat brushed clean. Not the kind of carelessness you saw in thieves. "What kind of work?" she asked. "Any you've got." He nodded toward the fence. "That break could use a brace rail, if you don't want it to bow." Hannah hesitated. She'd been alone here since her father passed the previous year. Folks in town had told her to sell and head east. But the thought of giving up this patch of land, these fences, the mesquite stand by the river, tightened her chest worse than any hard season. She'd managed on her own, but every chore cost twice the time with half the strength. "You can water your horse at the trough," she said finally. "I've got beans on the stove." Jason inclined his head. "Thank you." She kept the rifle in hand as he dismounted. On solid ground, he was taller than she'd guessed, easily a head above her. He moved with an unhurried steadiness, leading the mare to the trough, letting her drink in measured pulls. Every motion was deliberate, efficient. He didn't look around much, but when his eyes did shift, they took in everything. Inside, Hannah ladled beans into a tin bowl and set a heel of bread beside it. She slid it across the table when he stepped in, careful to keep the space between them wide. He didn't sit right away, just nodded his thanks and removed the thin leather gloves he'd been wearing. He ate slow, not like a man testing his welcome, but like someone used to making a meal last. "You've been alone here long?" he asked. "Since last March," she said. "My pa got sick that winter. Didn't make it." Jace paused, his spoon still for a beat. "That's hard." She shrugged. "Land doesn't stop needing work just because you're on your own." "That's true," he said, taking another bite. "I've seen too many leave their place to the wind." When he finished, he set the bowl neatly on the table, as if putting it exactly where it belonged. "Let me get to work on that fence." By late afternoon, the fence was braced solid. Jace had also checked the barn roof for leaks and tightened the wire gate on the chicken run without being asked. He didn't talk much while he worked, but he noticed things: the split in her water barrel, the way one corral post leaned too far west. She caught herself watching him from the porch as he lifted a section of rail into place, the muscles in his arms tightening under the sun. When the light began to soften toward evening, he led his horse toward the shed. "I'll bed down here," he said. "If you've got an old blanket, I can make do." She fetched one from the trunk, her father's old trail blanket, worn but clean. Handing it to him, she asked, "You moving on tomorrow?" "That's the plan," he said, "unless you've got more work." Hannah hesitated. She wasn't used to company, but the fence had been leaning for months, and the chicken wire was a week away from giving out. More than that, though. She realized she hadn't spoken more than a few sentences to anyone in weeks. "I've got a roof needs patching," she said finally. "You fix that. I'll see you fed another day." Jace gave one small nod, the kind that didn't waste words. "All right." He turned toward the shed, the last of the light catching on the curve of his shoulders. Hannah watched him go, the air cooling against her skin. She told herself it was just another set of hands for the work ahead, but something about the quiet weight he carried made the place feel different, even before the first night fell. The morning came with a pale wash of light over the eastern ridge, casting long shadows across the yard. Hannah stepped outside with her coffee, the mug warm in her hands. She half expected to find Jace still in the shed, but he was already in the corral, crouched low, and running a hand along the fence post he'd braced yesterday. His horse grazed quietly nearby. "Morning," she called. He looked up, gave a single nod. "Morning. Roof patching still needed?" "Yes, north side of the barn. The wind worked a few shingles loose last month." She took a sip. "You'll need a ladder." "I saw one in the lean-to," he said. "Might want to check the rafter while I'm up there." She blinked. "You can do that?" "Built my own shelter more than one once," he replied simply, standing to his full height. "Wood's wood." By mid-morning, Jace had stripped the loose shingles and hammered replacements in place. Hannah kept herself busy mending a feed sack, but every now and then, she caught herself watching him move steady, unhurried, like every action had a reason. The muscles in his arms flexed with each swing of the hammer, but there was no waste in his effort. When he came down from the roof, he asked, "What else?" She almost smiled. "You don't stop, do you?" "Not while the light's good." They spent the rest of the morning tightening chicken wire around the coop. The wire had sluggish in places, and Jace showed her how to twist it tight without cutting her palms. "Your hands'll thank you later," he said, passing her a small scrap of leather to use as a buffer. By noon, the coop was secure. Hannah ladled stew from the pot she'd started the night before, rabbit with beans and onion. Jace accepted the bowl, settling on the porch steps to eat. He didn't wolf it down even after hours of work. Each bite was deliberate, as if he meant to taste every part of it. You always eat that slow? She asked. He looked up from his bowl. Food's not something to rush. Her father had eaten like that too. She remembered chewing as though the meal deserved the time. It stirred something small, but familiar in her chest. After they'd eaten, Jace cleaned his bowl in the trough, using a scrap of cloth from his own pack. No waste, no fuss. Then he set about stacking the cut wood by the door, without her asking. It was late in the day, when a wagon rattled up the road. Hannah knew that sound, the uneven rhythm of the axle, and set her jaw. It was Tom Keeley, a neighbor from 2 miles east. He reined in at the gate, eyeing the yard. His gaze lingered on Jace, who was hauling a bundle of kindling. Didn't expect to see you keeping company, Keeley said, his voice just loud enough to carry. Just getting some work done, Hannah replied evenly. Keeley's eyes narrowed. That right. He glanced at Jace again, then back to her. You know folks in town talk. I don't listen much to talk, she said. Keeley spat into the dust. Suit yourself. Just remember, Apache don't stay where they can't take something. Jace didn't move, didn't speak. His expression didn't change, but Hannah saw the flicker in his eyes, something caught between tiredness and restraint. She stepped closer to the fence. Thanks for the warning, Tom, she said, her tone flat. You can be on your way now. Keeley held her gaze for a beat, before snapping the reins and rolling off down the road. The dust from his wagon hung in the air long after he was gone. Hannah turned toward Jace. You don't have to mind him. I've heard worse, he said, setting the kindling down by the porch. It's not right, she muttered. It's the way some folks are, he replied, voice even. Doesn't change what work needs doing. And with that, he picked up the hatchet and went back to splitting wood. That night, the air cooled fast, the desert losing heat as soon as the sun slipped behind the dragoons. Hannah brought out a lamp for the porch and set 2 mugs of coffee between them. Jace sat on the steps again, elbows resting on his knees. You said you've been alone since last March, he said. She nodded. Pa got sick in the winter. Was just me after that. No brothers, sisters? None. She wrapped her hands around the mug. Never had anyone come calling either. Not for courting, I mean. Jace glanced at her, but didn't speak right away. She was grateful for that. Most men she'd known would have filled the silence with pity or some clumsy jest. He just waited, letting her say or not say what she wanted. I've managed fine, she said finally. Some days are longer than others, is all. He took a sip of coffee, the steam curling between them. Long days are easier with more than one set of hands. She looked at him over the rim of her mug. You planning on staying long enough to make them easier? His mouth curved just slightly. Depends if there's more work. Hannah could have said there was enough work here to keep Amos busy until the next century. Instead, she just nodded toward the barn. North fence has a post needs replacing. Then I'll see to it tomorrow. Later, she watched from the window as he settled into the shed. He spread the old blanket she'd given him, laid his bedroll on top, and placed his knife within easy reach before lying down. It was the way of someone who never stopped expecting trouble. Hannah let the curtain fall and stepped back into the dim cabin. She told herself again that this was just a trade labor for food. But as she banked the fire, she couldn't quite shake the thought that the yard, the fence, even the quiet air around the place already felt different. The morning broke clean, the kind of desert light that seemed to scrape every ridge and stone sharp. Hannah stepped out with a pail for the chickens and found Jace already saddling his mare. Going somewhere? She asked. Mesquite bloom should be near the river by now, he said, cinching the strap. Bees will be working. Good sign for planting. She tilted her head. You want to check on flowers? Not just flowers. You can tell a season's worth from how the bees move. He paused, eyes catching hers. Come along, I'll show you. Hannah hesitated. The north fence could wait, she decided. All right, give me a minute. They set out slow, the morning air still cool. The trail ran down from her property into a wash, where the soil turned darker, richer. Jace rode ahead, pointing out plants along the way, a patch of wild onions, prickly pear pads with buds at their tips, a narrow stalk of agave, beginning its long climb toward bloom. Yucca there, he said, nodding toward a cluster. Root makes soap if you beat it right. Saved my hide once when water was scarce. Never thought about soap being more than something you buy, she said. Out here, you think about everything as something you find or make. They crossed the San Pedro at a shallow bend, stones slick under the horses' hooves. On the far side, the mesquite trees stood thick and low. Their branches hung with pale yellow flowers. The air smelled faintly sweet, carrying the hum of bees. Jace dismounted first, tying his reins to a crooked branch. Hannah did the same, though her knot earned a quiet chuckle from him. That's not holding anything, he said, stepping over to retie it. His fingers moved quick, the rope knotting snug without pulling too tight. There. Won't rub her raw. She smiled faintly. Guess you've tied a few horses, Sasties. A few. He straightened and looked toward the grove. Come on. And they walked beneath the branches, brushing aside fronds heavy with blossoms. The ground was soft with last year's leaves. Sunlight filtered through in thin streams, catching dust motes in the air. Hannah reached up, letting the flowers brush her fingertips. Pretty, she said. Jace plucked a small cluster from a low branch, careful not to break more than needed. He handed it to her. She pressed the petals to her cheek. Feels like spring is apologizing for the winter. He gave her a long look. You always talk like that. Like what? Like you see more than what's in front of you. She shrugged, suddenly aware of how close they stood. Maybe I just learned to look harder. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Hannah drew a breath, the kind you take before stepping into water. I've never been kissed. The words came out softer than she expected, but they seemed to hang in the warm air all the same. Jace's eyes held hers, steady as stone. He didn't step forward, didn't reach out. Let's start slow, he said, his voice low, certain. She felt her pulse in her ears. I wouldn't know how. You don't have to know anything. His gaze didn't waver. I'm not here to rush you. They stood there, the hum of bees weaving around them, the smell of mesquite heavy in the air. Hannah felt the tightness in her shoulders ease, just a little, as though something long wound had finally loosened. After a while, they sat beneath one of the larger trees, their backs against the same trunk, but a hand's span apart. Jace spoke about how his people used mesquite, grinding the pods into meal, boiling the bark for medicine. He told her about gathering in the early mornings with his grandfather, listening to the old man talk about the river before there were fences. Do you miss it? She asked. Every day, he said, but missing doesn't change what's gone. You carry what you can, leave the rest behind. On the ride back, they didn't say much. The air between them felt different, not heavier, not lighter, just changed, like the line between them had shifted in some quaint, unspoken way. Half a mile from the homestead, a small group of riders appeared along the road, 3 men on bay horse, one with a red sash at his waist. Hannah recognized the one in the middle, a Mexican trader named Luis Vargas, who sometimes passed through selling blankets and coffee beans. Tahoma, Vargas called with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Still wandering? Jace reined in. Working, he said simply. Vargas's gaze slid to Hannah, then back to Jace. Strange work for a man the army once called friend, then traitor. Hannah felt the shift in the air. Jace's jaw tightened. but he didn't rise to it. Safe travels, Vargas. The traders moved on, dust curling up behind them. Hannah waited until they were out of earshot. That true? What he said? Jace shrugged. Truth's a matter of who's telling it. She wanted to ask more, but the way he looked toward the mountains told her the conversation was closed for now. Back at the homestead, she unsaddled her horse while Jace checked the gate latch. The late sun slanted across the yard, catching in his hair. Hannah realized she didn't just feel safer with him here, she felt seen, in a way she hadn't before. Inside, she set the flowers from the grove in a small tin cup on the table. They didn't look like much, but the air held their sweetness. And every time she caught the scent, she remembered his words. Let's start slow. The first sign came with the wind. It was mid-afternoon, the light still bright, when a hot gust rolled in from the south, whipping grit across the yard and rattling the barn doors. Hannah looked up from the woodpile. Just as the air shifted sharp, electric, the smell of rain carried on it. Jace emerged from the chicken run, glancing toward the mountains. Dragoons are pulling the storm in, fate. Hannah squinted at the horizon. A wall of dark cloud climbed over the peaks, bruised purple at the base. Wasn't supposed to rain until next week. Desert doesn't keep a calendar. He strode toward the barn. I'll check the pasture before it hits. By the time she'd gathered the last of the laundry from the line, the wind had doubled, snapping the sheets like whips. Jace was just a dark shape in the distance, riding hard along the river's edge. She hurried to haul the wash inside, her apron snapping around her legs. Thunder cracked overhead, so close it made her teeth ring. Moments later, Jace appeared at the gate, swinging down from the saddle in one motion. His vest and trousers were dark with rain, hair plastered along his braid. That river's rising, he said, leading his mare into the shed. If it keeps on, the low pasture's going under. We don't keep stock there this time of year, Hannah said, but her voice felt thin under the wind's roar. Doesn't matter. If the bank cuts any more, it'll take part of your fence with it. Lightning split the sky, and the thunder followed almost instantly. Rain came hard, slanting sideways, stinging her face. Jace grabbed the old blanket from the shed and tossed it over the mare, then followed her toward the cabin. Inside, the air was warm from the morning fire. Hannah crossed to the trunk near the hearth and pulled out one of her father's shirts, cotton, sleeves a little short on Jace's long arms. She held it out without looking at him. He peeled off the wet buckskin vest and undershirt, the fabric clinging to his shoulders before falling away. Hannah turned toward the window, watching rivulets of water race down the glass as he pulled the dry shirt over his head. You always this prepared? He asked. I try, she said. Storms here don't give much warning. He leaned against the table, studying her for a moment. How long have you been keeping this place by yourself? Since Pa died, year and some. She busied herself with setting the kettle back on the stove. Didn't have much choice. You did, he said quietly. Most would have left. She shrugged, keeping her eyes on the rising steam. I don't like leaving things behind. He didn't answer right away, and the rain filled the space between them. Then, my brother didn't make it home from the war. Hannah turned to look at him. I didn't know you had a brother. Most don't. He was younger, reckless. Thought he could outride bullets. Jace's gaze dropped into his hands. I made it back. I've been asking why ever since. She let the words settle before speaking. What was he like? A small smile touched Jace's mouth. Faster than me with a rope. Always ready to fight for something, even when it wasn't worth it. You miss him. Every day, he said, echoing what he had told her at the mesquite grove. The kettle whistled softly. Hannah poured 2 mugs and set one in front of him. I never had brothers or sisters. Just Pa. And before you ask, no. I never had anyone come calling either. Not for courting. Jace's dark eyes met hers over the rim of the cup. He didn't smile or look away. That why you said what you did the other day? Her face warmed. Maybe. They drank in silence for a time, the rain easing from a roar to a steady patter. Then Jace set his cup down. I saw the cut in your lower field, he said. Water's been chewing at it for seasons. I know, she said. Haven't had the time to deal with it. If it gets worse, you'll lose more than fence. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. When I see something that could wash away, I try to anchor it. Hannah considered that. You talking about land or something else? His mouth curved faintly. Both. When the rain eased enough to step outside, they went to the north edge of the property. The wash there was running fast, water the color of rust. Together they marked where a trench could redirect the flow away from the fence line. Best to start while the ground's soft, Jace said, setting his boot into the mud. You always work in the rain. Only when it matters. For the next hour they dug side by side. The soil was heavy and wet, clinging to their boots, but the trench took shape under the steady rhythm of shovels. Hannah's arms ached, but she didn't stop. She noticed the way Jace matched his pace to hers, never rushing ahead. By the time they returned to the cabin, the clouds had begun to break apart, thin light spilling across the wet yard. Inside, the fire's heat felt twice as good. Hannah hung her damp sweater by the hearth and sank into the chair across from him. You're not what I expected, she said. He raised an eyebrow. And what was that? I'm not sure, but it wasn't this. She gestured to the patched roof, the tightened coop wire, the fresh trench outside. Most men who pass through just want a place to rest. I'm not most men, he said simply. Hannah met his gaze for a long moment. No, you're not. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full, like the air after rain, quiet, but alive with something waiting. The days after the storm came bright and warm, the air smelling of wet earth and blooming cactus. Hannah worked the back plot with her hoe, turning damp soil for planting. Jace was mending a broken hinge on the shed door when the sound of distant hoofbeats reached them. A lone rider approached a boy from town, barely out of his teens. He tipped his hat to Hannah and handed her a folded paper. From Mrs. Weller, he said. She's organizing the spring dance. Hannah unfolded the paper. The schoolhouse in Benson would be cleared for music and supper 2 Saturdays from now. She hadn't been to a dance since before her father took sick. She'd almost forgotten the way the paper lanterns glowed over the yard, the fiddle music spilling out the open windows. You going? The boy asked. Hannah shook her head. Haven't thought about it. Plenty folks asking after you, he said with a grin. Be good to see you there. He tipped his hat again and rode off. When she looked up, Jace was watching her from the shed, one hand resting on the doorframe. What's a spring dance? Music. Food. Half the town comes out. You like them? I used to, she admitted. Before. He didn't press. That night, over coffee, she said, I was thinking about the dance. Thinking about going? Jace asked. I don't know. Feels strange. People remember me coming in with pie, sitting quiet in the corner. No one remembers me as anything else. He set his cup down. If you want to go, I'll go with you. She studied him. You'd do that? Yes. A part of her wanted to say no, to keep things as they were, safe within the boundaries of the ranch. But another part, smaller and stubborn, wanted to see what it would be like to walk into that schoolhouse with him beside her. The evening of the dance came with a warm wind. Hannah stood before the cracked mirror above her wash basin, smoothing the pale cotton dress she'd finished hemming the day before. Her hands shook more from uncertainty than excitement. She'd worn something like this only to church with her father, and back then, she'd kept her eyes low. Outside, Jace brushed down the horse, he says. He wore a clean white shirt under a fitted buckskin vest, the sleeves rolled to his forearms. His hair was freshly braided, a strip of red cloth tied just above the raven feather. When he turned and saw her, his gaze moved over her without rush, lingering, but not heavy. "You're ready?" he asked. "I think so." He offered his arm. She hesitated only a second before taking it. They rode into Benson with the sun low and red over the hills. The town was lit with lanterns strung between the schoolhouse and the hitching posts. Laughter and the high sound of a fiddle drifted out into the street. They tied the horses and walked toward the light. Inside, the desks had been pushed to the walls, leaving space for couples to move. The smell of roast beef and coffee mixed with the warm scent of bodies. Hannah felt eyes on her, but none lingered the way she feared not when Jace's hand rested gently on the small of her back. "You don't have to dance if you'd rather not," he said. "I want to," she surprised herself by answering. They stepped into the open space. The fiddle picked a lively tune, but Jace didn't rush her. His movements were small, close, matching her steps. His palm was rough against hers, but his hold was steady, guiding without pulling. "You always this careful?" she asked, her voice low. "With things that matter," he said. The song ended, and they stepped aside. She expected him to let go of her hand, but he didn't not, until the next tune started. This time they moved in an easy rhythm, their boots whispering against the worn floorboards. When they stepped outside for air, the night was cool and quiet compared to the hum inside. Lanterns swayed in the breeze, casting patches of light across the porch. "Folks didn't stare like I thought they would," she said. "That's not your burden anymore," he replied. "Was it ever yours?" He leaned against the railing, looking out at the street. "I used to think I had to carry what I didn't fix, but I know better now. You can't bring back what's gone. You can only hold what's still here." Hannah looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached for his hand and laced her fingers through his. "Then hold this." He squeezed her hand once, and the quiet between them deepened into something solid. They didn't get home until the moon was high, silvering the mesquite and the river beyond. In the cabin, Hannah lit the lamp while Jace set their things aside. She didn't leave him to the cot by the hearth that night. Instead, she took his hand and led him toward her bed. Neither spoke as they lay side by side, boots off, clothes still smelling faintly of wood smoke and lantern oil. The silence was different now, not waiting, not uncertain. When the first light of morning crept through the shutters, they rose together, moving easily in the small space they shared. The weeks after the dance fell into an easy rhythm, the kind Hannah hadn't known she'd been craving. Morning light through the cabin shutters, coffee on the porch while the sun climbed over the low hills, then the day's work split between them, without much need for words. Jace built new shelving in the pantry from mesquite boards he'd planed himself. Hannah began sewing a second quilt from flour sacks and worn shirts of his that had frayed beyond mending. Some days they worked side by side. Others they moved through separate tasks, meeting again over supper. It wasn't a loud kind of companionship. It was steady. And steady had a way of settling deep. By early summer, the back plot was green with beans, squash, and corn. The San Pedro ran low and clear, its banks heavy with willow and cottonwood. One afternoon, Jace took a net down to the river. Hannah followed, carrying a small basket for whatever they caught. She watched him wade in, the water lapping at his boots as he hauled the net from the shallows, silver flashes twisting inside. The sunlight caught on the droplets streaming from the cords, making them glint like a curtain of glass. "I've been thinking about putting in another garden bed," she said as he stepped onto the bank. "That mean I'm staying?" he asked, one brow lifting. She smiled. "You already knew." He grinned faintly, hefting the net. "We'll need another smoke rack for these fish. I'll cut the poles tomorrow." Seasons turned. By the next spring they had added a small pen for goats and a second room onto the cabin, just enough for more storage and a cot. Hannah began keeping chickens in earnest. The coop Jace had tightened that first week now stood solid, with a new roof he'd built from scavenged tin. They didn't talk about the future much. They didn't have to. It was there in the way she kept 2 mugs by the stove now, in the way his boots stood beside hers by the door. The town still had its talkers, but most folks in Benson learned quickly enough that Hannah Lee and Jace Tahoma weren't passing through each other's lives. They were making something that lasted, in their own way. In the fall of their 3rd year together, Hannah gave birth to a girl with dark hair and a stubborn mouth. They named her Lena, no family name, just something that felt right. Jace carved her a cradle from pine, smoothing the rails until they were satin under his hands. Hannah stitched a small cap from scraps of the pale shawl she'd worn to the spring dance. Life became busier, but not less steady. The baby's cries joined the chorus of morning sounds, rooster calls, the rattle of wind through mesquite, the scrape of Jace's boots on the porch. In the evenings, when Lena was asleep, they would sit by the fire, her hand resting on his knee, his arm along the back of her chair. Years slid past like water in the San Pedro, sometimes slow, sometimes swift, always moving. The creek never took the bridge again. The garden grew full. The goats multiplied. The mesquite grove still bloomed each spring, and every year Jace brought Hannah a small cluster of flowers, careful not to break more than needed. They didn't mark anniversaries with fanfare. They measured time by the work they'd done, the storms weathered, the mornings shared, by how often one of them would glance up and find the other already looking. One autumn evening, with the first chill creeping into the air, Hannah sat on the porch with Lena asleep in her arms. The sky above was a soft wash of lavender, stars beginning to show at the edges. Jace came up from the pasture, his shirt damp from the last of the day's work. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. For a long moment, they just watched the light fade. "You still glad you stayed?" she asked quietly. He turned his head toward her, eyes deep and steady, as they'd been the day she first saw him through the dust. "Every sunrise," he said. Hannah smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. The night settled around them, the steady rhythm of his breathing matching her own. They stayed that way until the stars were thick overhead, the baby warm between them, the land quiet in its rest. And in the deep, unhurried stillness, Hannah knew that what they'd built wasn't something that could wash away. It was anchored by work, by trust, and by the slow crossing they'd made together from strangers to something far more certain. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of this story. I'm truly glad you stayed with me. Your support means so much. Please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel so I can keep bringing you more heartfelt stories like this one.